Mastering the third shot drop is essential if you want to consistently score while you're serving. So in this video, I'm going to show you the science behind the perfect third shot drop. After you understand this, I'll cover exactly how you can optimize your technique to make it happen every time. So what is a perfect third shot drop? Well, to start, we need to think about the landing zone. So the landing zone is where the ball is going to land as it's coming over the net. So before this video, we did a bunch of testing to determine where the best spot to make the ball land was. So the best spot to make the ball land is around right here. So this is about a foot from the kitchen line. But you're good if you make it in this range. So as you can see here, we have some dots. This is 2 feet. So if you can hit the ball on your drop 2 feet from the kitchen line to the kitchen line, that's what we would consider a successful drop, because in this range, your opponent is guaranteed to have to hit the ball up. So the goal of the drop is to make your opponent hit up on the ball. You want them to have to hit up to make it over the net so that they can't attack. And if you can get it into this range, that's probably going to happen. The only caveat to that is if you're playing someone who's much taller and can reach farther, you might need to bring your target closer to net, as they'll be able to reach over more, and maybe we'll be able to hit the ball higher as you're getting to this back portion. Another thing to consider is that when you're getting to the back portion of the landing zone, your opponents might be able to take the ball out of the air, but that's actually okay because they're still going to have to hit the ball up. Ideally though, you get it around right here where they might not be able to take the ball out of the air, which could actually jam them a little bit and mess them up. So this is the ideal spot, but this whole range is good. So as I said, this is a 2-foot zone, but you can actually make it larger by drawing an angle. I'm going to explain this more later. The next thing you have to understand though is the height that you're hitting the ball as it's passing the net. So the next thing you really need to consider is the height the ball is during its flight path. So we did a lot of testing before this video, and we determined the best place to aim your drop is around 8 inches to 1.5 feet when it passes over the net. The next thing to consider though is the height at the peak of the trajectory. So when the ball is at its peak, it's around right over the kitchen line, and it's generally 5.5 to 6 feet off of the ground. From here, the ball will fall to where it's in that 8 inches to 1.5 feet range over the net as it's passing. So this would actually be 3 feet 8 inches to 4.5 feet above the ground as it's passing the net. If you can get these two heights lined up, odds are you're hitting a pretty good drop. In terms of the speed that you hit the ball, this is super important, because if you're hitting the ball too hard or too soft, you're not going to be able to make the ball land in the landing zone at the heights that we just went over. So when you're hitting the ball from the baseline and you're going at the trajectory that we just talked about, if you're hitting it down the line, your drop should be around 19 to 20 miles per hour. If it's outside of that range, you're probably not going to land in the landing zone. So it's actually a very specific speed you need to hit this ball. We did a lot of testing. When you go cross court, it goes up a little bit to around 22 or 23 miles an hour. But moral of the story is when you're hitting a drop, it's a pretty specific speed. So you need to be very careful about how much power you put on the ball. The next thing to consider is that within the parameters we just talked about, there's 3 different spins that you can use on drops. So there's slice, where you cut under the ball and the ball spins like this. You can hit it flat, where there's no spin on the ball. And then you can go for a top spin drop, where you spin over the ball. So I'm going to talk about these spins later in the video. Before that though, I want to talk about where people go wrong on their drops. There's a lot of different ways you can make mistakes. So the biggest mistake that you can make on a drop is miss it in the net. And there's 2 ways that you can make that happen. The first is you hit the ball too slow. So as you can see there, my trajectory was right. It had the right sort of arcing trajectory, but I hit the ball too slow, so it didn't go high enough, and I missed in the net as a result of it. The second way that you could miss in the net is you aim the ball too low. So I might hit the ball at the right speed, but I aimed it too low there. It didn't have that loopy trajectory, so the ball didn't go over the net. And doing this is very easy. It's very easy to make that mistake because, as I said, it's a very specific amount of speed and trajectory. So in the next section, I'm going to show you how you can prevent that from happening, because it happens to everyone. Even the best players miss their drops in the net. So you're more so trying to figure out how to minimize that from happening. I'll show you that in the next section. The next mistake though is missing the ball too high or too far. So missing the ball too high is a big problem, because even if I get the ball to land in the landing zone, if it's too high when it's passing the net, my opponent could actually have the opportunity to hit it off the bounce. So it's really easy to attack if the ball bounces high off the bounce. So if I can hit the ball like this, even if it lands right in front of Drew, he can attack me on that. So you never want to hit the ball too high. And hitting the ball too far is bad for obvious reasons. If I hit the ball too far, my opponent can just attack me out of the air like that. So hitting the ball too far is probably the second worst thing you can do, but hitting the ball too high is not great either. So you want to do whatever you can when you're hitting drops to minimize these mistakes. But before I show you how to prevent these, I encourage you to look down at the subscribe button, because right now we're trying to become the first pickleball channel in history to reach 250,000 subscribers. So if you want to help us make history, make sure to subscribe. So in order to prevent the mistakes we just went through, you need to be able to control the power of the ball and to control the height of the ball very consistently. And there's a few technical aspects to making that happen. The first is the most important one. You need to make sure you're hitting the center of the paddle every time you hit a drop. Because what happens is when you miss the center, if I hit the ball out here to the side, I'm going to lose some speed. So as I said, you need to hit the drop around 19 to 20 miles an hour if you're going down the line to make it in the landing zone. So if I hit it off to the side, I might lose 3 miles an hour, and that's going to cost me missing the ball in the net. So if I hit it off to the side, I might hit it too slow, which might make me hit it into the net. So you need to make sure that you're hitting the center of the paddle every single time, right in the sweet spot, so that your drop has a consistent speed on it. The next thing you want to think about is when you're hitting the ball, you want to make sure you're always rocking forward through the ball and you have a consistent energy moving forward. If I hit the ball when I'm moving back, I'm going to hit the ball slower, because when I'm moving back, that means my paddle is also not going to be going forward as quickly. Imagine you're throwing a free throw in basketball and every shot you're going a different direction. It's going to be a lot harder to make the ball in the hoop versus if you're just doing the same thing every single time. So you want to make it easy on yourself when you're hitting drops by going forward through the ball every single time. And the last two things that you need to make sure happen are you want to hit the ball from the same height every time, so from the same contact point, right around here, and you want to hit the ball as it's falling down into your paddle. So you don't want to hit the ball as it's rising. So what does that look like? As you can see, if I'm doing drops over and over again in a rally, what's happening to where I can make the same thing happen every time? Look down. I'll give you a hint. It has to do with my feet. So you need to make sure that when you're preparing for a drop, you're really active with your feet, because you need to be able to get into position to make all of those things happen. If I'm lazy and I'm just standing right here, I'm probably going to hit the ball as it's rising. I'm probably going to be falling back, and I'm probably going to miss the center of my paddle too, because it's coming so quickly up off the bounce. So sometimes you might actually need to back up a little bit to hit the ball as it's falling and to give yourself more time to hit the ball in the center. So moral of the story, always be active with your feet right as your opponents are hitting the return, so you can get into the right position quickly to hit a good drop that has a consistent level of power. When it comes to the height control, there's two things you need to think about. The first is you don't want to be too wristy with your drop, because if you're too wristy, you might get too much power, but you also might contact the ball as your wrist is too flexed upward. So if I do that, the ball is going to go up, right? So what I do on my drop is I try to keep my wrist as steady as I can. I only use my shoulder for power. So try not to use any wrist. That's going to make it way easier to aim it at the same trajectory every single time. The next thing is you don't want to take too big of a swing, because the same thing could happen. If I'm taking too big of a swing, I might contact the ball too far up. It's a lot harder to time it in the right contact point, and I might hit the ball too hard, and I might hit the ball too high. So have a compact motion and don't use too much wrist. It's going to be way easier to get the right height on the ball. In terms of spins, everything else we just went through stays the same, but as you can see, when I hit a slice drop versus a topspin drop, my technique changes a lot. So when I'm hitting a topspin drop, I'm really riding up behind the back of the ball, and my stroke is less linear. So on a slice or a flat drop, I'm going more through the ball, and on a topspin drop, I'm having to come up more. Because of that, a topspin drop is definitely a little more difficult to get a consistent amount of power, because I'm having to swing faster by going up through the ball. So it takes a little bit more skill to be able to make a topspin drop inconsistently, but there is an advantage. When it bounces, it won't bounce as high. So even if you hit a topspin drop a little bit higher, the ball will jet off more, and it'll be harder for your opponents to attack. So if you're hitting a topspin drop, you might want to go a little bit higher to make it safer for yourself. The advantage of the slice or the flat drop is that it's more consistent. But if you hit it too high, it's going to bounce up and your opponent might be able to attack. So those are just some things to keep in mind. Now we're gonna talk about landing zones and the best way to think about aiming for them. Before that though, I wanted to reiterate that hitting the sweet spot of your paddle, this area, is probably the most important aspect to making them in consistently. So if you're using a lower quality paddle that has a tiny sweet spot, drops might feel like they're a lot harder than they actually are. This is exactly the reason why we made our paddle the Sweet Spot Pro. With this paddle, you have a lot more room for air without having to worry about mishits that mess you up. Best part is, for Valentine's Day, we're running a sale that makes the Sweet Spot $99.99. Just make sure to use code Valentine at checkout for $20 off. This paddle has all the same materials as the best ones on the market, so this is definitely one of the best deals you can get if you're looking for a new paddle. Now though, let's get into our landing zones. So as we mentioned, the landing zone is a 2-foot block from the kitchen line. If you go farther than this, they're gonna take it out of the air. If you go too short, you might miss in the net, or the ball might bounce up to where they can attack. But there is a trick to make the landing zone bigger, and that's hitting the ball cross court. So as you can see here, my tape measure is at an angle, and as we figured out from a bunch of testing, when you hit the ball cross court, you get anywhere from 10% to 25% more room within the landing zone. Just because when you draw a line at an angle in a box, it's longer than a straight line, right? So by hitting the ball cross court, you actually make it a little bit safer and more consistent to hit a drop. So it depends on how extreme of an angle you're hitting, but even just aiming for the middle will give you more room for air. So that's something really important to think about when you're going for drops. It's a lot riskier to go down the line. The net is also a little bit higher towards the side. So when you're going for a down the line drop, you have a higher net and you have less room in the landing zone. So it's always going to be probably a little safer to go either towards the middle or cross court. Another thing to consider is that when you're aiming your drops, going to your opponent's backhand is usually better than going to their forehand, because one, they can't reach as far, and two, they're usually not going to be as good at attacking off of their backhand as they are on their forehand. So this right here, if you're playing a righty, is a great target. I'm on the right side, and if you're the one hitting the drop, aiming towards the center at my backhand is a great target, because you're going to get the advantage of going a little bit cross court and you're going to my backhand. So if they're hitting a drop at me, it's a little bit challenging for me to reach that ball. So this is a great target. If you're going for the left side, the best target against a righty is probably to go for the more angle out to the backhand, because here it's going to make me hit a backhand, and you also get the most possible benefit of hitting it cross court. So the more angle you draw, the more space you have. So you do get the risk of missing the ball wide here, but you get that huge angle and you get a ton of space in the landing zone. So those are probably the two best drop targets if you're playing a righties. Obviously some people have worse forehands, doesn't apply to everyone. Just two great ones to try if you want the maximum consistency and the maximum benefit of aiming your drops. And the last thing to consider is that when you're hitting your drops, it makes it a lot easier if you're just focusing on one reference point in terms of where you're aiming them. So you can either focus on where the ball is landing or where the height of the ball is when it's passing the net, but you don't want to be focusing on everything at the same time. That will confuse you. So a lot of players say that they like to focus solely on aiming a foot away from the kitchen, and they sort of just let everything else follow that. I personally prefer aiming over the net. So I like to just aim my shots at the right speed, about 8 inches to a foot and a half foot from the net. I just aim a foot over the net, and then obviously I might miss it a little bit. I'm curious though, which works better for you? Do you focus on where the ball is landing, or do you focus on where the ball is crossing the net? Make sure to let me know in the comments. But if you want to learn a new shot called the hybrid third, last week I made a full video on that. So if you want to watch that, click this.